Hello, and thanks for joining us here on Encore. Coming up on today's show. My guest went from a successful stint in the world of business to a full-time gig as a prize-winning author. Franco-American writer Antoine Bello brings us something of a psychiatric heist in his latest novel, Scherbius and Me. Antoine joins me in the studio to pick apart illusions, reality, fake identities, and more. Antoine Bello, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, your latest novel is called Scherbius et moi, also Shelbus and Me. Can you start by telling us who this mysterious Scherbius is?
Scherbius is an imposter. The setting is Paris, 1977-78. And Scherbius is this incredible pathological imposter who has worked in all kinds of jobs. He has been a teacher, he has been a tax examiner, he has been a lifeguard. He can do pretty much anything. And after one imposture too many, he has been sentenced to follow a psychiatric treatment. So the book is about his relationship with a psychiatrist over the course of 25 years.
Okay, well, looking at the cover page of the book, I was a bit confused because we encounter Scherbius, we encounter this Me, we encounter an author, Maxime Leverrier, and another one named Antoine Bello. We were a little intrigued, so we went to speak to your publisher, Jean-Marie Laclavetine, to find out more.
Depuis le tout début, moi quand j'ai connu Antoine Bello.
When I first met Antoine Bello, I was part of a jury judging a prize for young writers. It featured pieces written by very young people. He must have been 17 or 18 at the time, and his writing was like nothing I'd seen before.
Et donc des textes inédits. Et nous avions primé deux textes qui étaient.
So we decided to give a prize to two different authors, but in fact both of the authors were him. So we had to award the prize to these two very different texts, which were both excellent. But we discovered that they were written by the same person because he'd used a pseudonym for the second one. I think that his work always poses this question about identity, about reality, and that's a very topical question.
So it looks like that both you and Shelbus share a taste for duplicity.
Yes, I confess. So that's the complex build-up of the book. Leverrier is the psychiatrist, and Leverrier writes a book about Scherbius. And this book turns out to be a bestseller. And after 5 years, he decides to write another one. And he adds to that first book whatever he has gathered in the last 5 years. And he does that again 5 years later, and 5 years later, and 5 years later. So we have the six successive editions of that same book over the course of 25 years. And of course, Leverrier is confronted with an ever-changing reality because Scherbius, being an imposter, he keeps deceiving. That's what he does. I mean,
and you too, as
Jean-Marie
said.
And that's what I do, of course, as a writer. So the Scherbius et moi can be interpreted in two ways. There is a way in which Scherbius et moi means Scherbius and Leverrier, the psychiatrist who writes about him. And of course, Scherbius et moi is Scherbius and myself.
And so why did you use that pseudonym when you were so young?
Why did I use that?
The pseudonym, yeah.
Of Scherbius?
No, when you were entering the writing competition.
Oh, you know, that writing contest, you had to submit one text, and I had two that I was fairly happy with, and I didn't want to have to pick one. So I gave my name and the name of my brother. And we had to submit, I remember, we had to submit copies of our, IDs. So I asked for my brother's ID, and I submitted both texts. And when I got the phone call, telling me I had won, my first question, I mean, it was funny because I had to ask, can you remind me which text did I win with? And I was supposed to, of course, have only submitted once.
Well, it worked out well. Now, in the course of his psychiatric work, your narrator in this book flags up another famous book, which is called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's the industry handbook, which is published in the US. It's been being used 60 years after its first publication. It classifies mental illness.
And used across the world. Even though it originates in the US, everybody in the world uses it.
Indeed. And your narrator is very critical of the American approach to mental illness. Why is that?
I'm not sure if it's really critical of the American way, but it's in a way it's a form of American imperialism. All mental diseases would originate in the US and then would be exported to the rest of the world. Like, for instance, sexual troubles, for instance, are identified by American psychiatrists. And then, you know, people in Japan, people in Germany, people in the Middle East will have to go through the DSM and will have to say, okay, that person that I have in front of me, what kind of, you know, disorder does he have? If you think about it, I mean, diseases should originate, are very much, some of them, especially the mental diseases, have a very strong cultural bias to them. And Americans, as they are and as they always do, you know, it starts with them and they think it's going to be interesting for the rest of the world, and you can't blame them. I mean, you know, we shouldn't maybe import that manual if it's that, you know, skewed, but we keep doing it. What I really learned with that manual, working on the different editions, is that the world of mental disorders is changing so quickly, and what you take for granted 1 year, 5 years later will be, you know, completely dismissed. Like homosexuality at one point was a mental disorder, 5 years later it's no longer one, but 10 or 15 years later, who knows, it might become again. It makes you very, you know, it gives you a relative perspective on things.
Now, you mentioned that Shelbus took on different identities. He led different lives in a way, different jobs, some of them you mentioned. If you were to have taken an alternative path, not a writer, which one would you have taken?
Well, I took one already. I was a businessman before, as you mentioned, an entrepreneur. And I loved those 15 years of my life. I wish I had been a surgeon. That's a job I've fantasized about. And if I were a young student today, I would probably study cognitive sciences and neuro, you know, sciences. I think that's where there are so many interesting things to do in that field.
We see that in your literature.
Yes.
Now, I also read that you're a huge fan of Wikipedia. You use the site extensively for your research, and you've contributed financially to the project, encouraged your readers to do the same. For you, why is this kind of crowdsourced content the resource of the future?
It is, I think Wikipedia is one of the only places on the web where you can still debate and reach a compromise. If you go to the page, for instance, of George W. Bush, highly controversial figure, if ever there was one, you will be struck, I think, by how balanced it is. You will see the good things about George Bush, and there are some, and you will see the bad things about George Bush, and there are plenty. But it will be put in a perspective that does not offend anybody, because if you are offensive on Wikipedia, your changes are reversed, you know, almost immediately. So it forces you to think in a more neutral and balanced way. And I think the result is those very well architectured pages that you can find on Wikipedia that state facts, plenty of facts, mention the opinions that exist, but never take on those opinions. And that I appreciate. It's invaluable to me.
Now, in the world of journalism, somewhere like France 24 here, we're often a bit cautious about sites like Wikipedia and their reliability, because there's the idea that anyone can contribute, they can say anything. And with the threat of fake news, that's a bit more urgent today. Do you think that we live in a post-truth society, as some people say?
I think we've always lived in a post-truth society, so I don't know where the post starts. I think facts exist. Facts are like dots. And then everybody is free to connect those dots the way they want and to build a narrative that will connect those dots. And that is my religion. There are facts, there are dots. The facts are the same for everybody. The dots are ours to make. And if you start thinking that way, you start understanding things like Wikipedia, for instance. They provide the dots, but they don't tell you how to connect them. They tell you that some people try to connect them this way or that way, but then, you know, it's your interpretation. And it's the same with the post-truth. I don't believe in truth. Truth does not exist.
A bold statement.
In my opinion, truth does not exist. Facts exist. Reality exists. The truth does not exist. That philosophical notion of something called the truth, I don't believe in it.
Okay. Well, finally, I know you're a voracious reader, but when you're not reading, you're also a fan of cinema, and you've pointed us in the direction of a recent favourite, Annihilation, starring Natalie Portman. Why should we rush to see this?
Alex Garland, the guy who did that movie and wrote that movie, is a genius. He was a screenwriter for Danny Boyle before, starting with The Beach and then the vampire movies, I think the 28 Days and 28 Weeks, and is the guy who did Ex Machina, that beautiful movie with Alicia Vikander about artificial intelligence. To me, is the smartest writer in the field right now.
Okay, well, thanks for the tip. Antoine Bello, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Indeed, you can catch Annihilation at the moment on Netflix, and Antoine's book, Scherbius et moi, is available in French. For more arts and culture, you can visit our website, and you can also keep up with Encore on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Something's come through the fence.
Through the fence?
We have to go back.
I can't go back.
We can camp here tonight. It's destroying everything.
It's not destroying. It's making something new.